Welcome back, baseball fans, to the token round of the 1973-76 draft. We have drafted 8 rounds for 32 teams, 256 players, yet the draft is not over. As we didn't start this process with a full 640 men because teams elected to improve players on the roster instead of adding players to their roster. There's a list of those, and they're usually popular players, guys who go to all-star games, potentially Hall of Famers, because you're always trying to get the top shelf as good as you can. You see guys like Joe Torre here, Dave Parker, Jim Palmer, Bill Madlock. There's some marginal players as well. Bob Forge, Gary Maddox, Bate McBride, Dave Winfield. A whole mixed bag of talent that can get better. So that's one of the reasons why we don't have the draft complete. Also, teams can elect to simply look around and find other players who are still available and cut guys on their team. They can also take a couple players on their team and swap years with them. That happened a lot more this year than in recent years, so that both players are better in the new years they are aligned with. So there's a lot going on, and of course we determined an order of how to select, which is based on the token system, and we kept track of each team was allotted 5 tokens or dollars, draft units, throughout the offseason and in the draft. And when we get to the token round, that is the order we drafted in. So it began, as we're done, with Kansas City, who had 7 draft tokens, and they would end up having the first, I think they have the 11th and maybe the 18th overall pick. Where's the next Kansas City in here somewhere? They passed at 29. So let's get started and see what Kansas City did in the token round of the draft. Step 1 for Kansas City was they improved Frank White's 1973 card to a 1975 card. It extends his stay with Kansas City 3 more years and brings his batting average up to 250, and he's now a 3 defensively. He'll get better, become a Gold Glove second baseman. But when he was 21 years old, he wasn't very good. So they improved Frank White in Kansas City. Smart. Next, the Expos did a similar move. They selected Larry Parrish's sophomore card in 76, and he had the sophomore slump. So they swapped it out with his 1975 card, when I think he might have been Rookie of the Year or runner-up for Rookie of the Year, with a 274, 724 OPS performance in 1975. Something happened and he fell off in 76, so they fixed that. Next up, the Mets. The Mets had simply to add a player. So we look back, and I think the Mets had to add 2 players, if I'm not mistaken. They moved Tony Saleta into an outstanding 1975 card, so he vacates the year of 74. And also, Bob Apotica vacated his 74 card to move into 1976. So they needed to add 2 74 cards looking on the street. They needed a backup catcher and utility infielder. Mets did a really nice job here. The Mets got Tim Blackwell, a switch-hitting catcher, to join Jerry Grody. Blackwell gets on more versus righties. Grody gets on more versus lefties. Grody can throw. Blackwell can't. Blackwell hits just 246, and he won't play a lot. I think Grody will play most of the time, but he gets an extra left-handed bat in the New York Met offense. Next up, the Giants, with the 4th overall pick with 7 tokens, and the San Francisco Giants pass with extra money in their wallet. Sort of proud that they not only did they collect tokens, they couldn't even figure out how to improve their team. They aced the draft. They get an A+ for drafting. So now we go down to 6 tokens, 1 more than the allotted you get. And we begin with the first team drafting the Ohio players. They're going to start moving their personnel around. They begin that by moving Larry Lentz into a 1974 card because he's a double-A stealer. He steals 50 bases. Double-A stealer for Ohio players. That'll help them. Now we got the Cardinals. And the Cardinals may have set a record for how many guys can a team improve. They improved Joe Torre, vacating 73. They improved Bob Forsch, vacating 74. They improved Mike Tyson, vacating 73. They improved Bate McBride, vacating 74. They have to add 4 guys off the street. Think about that. That's 20% of your roster. You have to is just anybody's guys, and you got to do the best you can. The first guy they went for, left-handed pitching, the hardest thing to find, and you know what? They found one of their own. They found a St. Louis Cardinal left-handed pitcher in the year of 1974 named Mike Wallace. And not only that, he's the last left-handed pitcher in the box of 1974. And he's a Cardinal, and the Cardinals got him. So talk about crossing your fingers and toes. The Cardinals, by the skin of their teeth, managed to comport to the league minimum. Mike Wallace is a 2.41 ERA. He's actually very good. Next up, the Padres. Padres had to add a pitcher, right-handed, starter or relief. They found the Giants' John D'Acquisto, who can pitch on 3 days rest. D'Acquisto moves to the Padres later in the decade. Well, he moves to the Padres now in our recreation. He goes into the starting rotation, and Ed Sprague will move from the Padre rotation to the bullpen. All right, Cleveland Indians. I talked about how great a draft they had. They passed. They're done. They knock. They don't want another card. They're standing pat. So once you pass, just like the Giants, you can skip right over you the rest of undrafted free agency. Toronto, they knock. They're happy. Toronto is a very smart drafting team. Probably the best of the 8 expansion teams as far as making shrewd moves. It's usually you start making shrewd moves at the beginning of your existence, and then you can roll over some talent and you don't screw up enough, and there you go. Some expansion teams are horrendous. Some are shrewd, and Toronto was one of those. All right, Colorado needed to add a pitcher for 74. They found Jack Aker as a reliever, and he's bounced around a few different teams. Aker's got a 3.57 ERA. Nice pick for a pitching star of Colorado. Next up, Kansas City. Fran Healy's their starting catcher. They needed a backup. They needed an extra left-handed bat in their lineup. They found Duke Sims. He has been a fun card, mostly for Cleveland in our timeline. A left-handed hitting catcher who can also play right field. Still does it. Doesn't hit 300 anymore. He's hitting 245 with a 718 OPS, but that's good enough to give Fran Healy some days off in Kansas City. Next up, the Pirates, and this is not a particularly good move, but it's a sort of necessity. Luke Walker has pitched for the Pirates, and they moved him out of his 1974 card into his 1973 card, simply to lower the whip to a somewhat more respectable 1.59 from 1.76. If that seems like it's really high, yes, it is, but you have to remember that's because he faces a lot of right-handed batters, and the plan is for this particular lefty is to face lefties only, and Luke Walker's 73 is a little bit better than his 74. Next up, the Expos. They did a flip of years, and it was the Larry Parrish. So Larry Parrish went from 76 to 75, and lefty reliever Mickey Scott went from 1975 to 1976, where his ERA is still 3.23. If you're wondering about Larry Parrish, that move was facilitated because of the flexibility that Mickey Scott had with 2 different cards. So basically the Expos said, you know what, it doesn't really matter for Mickey Scott. It matters a lot for Larry Parrish. So that's how that worked for 2 players getting better. Actually, one gets better, one stayed the same in this particular case. New York Mets talked about them adding a catcher and an infielder. This is a cool little infielder. Junior Kennedy plays all the infield positions. He can play center field. The stats aren't completely right. He's a 158 batting average, but he's got a ton of walks on his card. He actually has a 360 on base percentage to go with a 158 batting average. The Mets are a team, if they can't get batting average, they get on base percentage. And that's pretty smart for the Mets. They're not going to have a powerful offense like the Braves and Phillies, but hopefully they have the best pitching in their division and very good defense, a great throwing catcher, a great shortstop, and they do some clever stuff with on-base percentage. The Atlanta Braves, just mentioned that powerhouse offense, they pass. Also in this column, the second column, when you don't see a team name, it means that Atlanta is team 27 of the 32 drafting. Next up, the Cubs, and this is one of the busiest teams in the timeline. They had to add a guy. This is the first ad. When they improved Bill Madlock to give him his batting title of 75, they needed a player of 1974. They added Jack Brohammer, a left-handed second baseman. They needed a second baseman versus lefties. And Paul Popovich returns to the Cubs. He hits lefties better than righties. He's got power against lefties. He can play off infield positions. Good utility role, replacing the Glenn Beckert role for the Cubs. All right, the White Sox had to add one player, and it was a pitcher from the year of 1973. Funny part about it was they let Tom Bradley get away, leave the organization, and go to Seattle. And Seattle let Jerry Bell leave their organization, so it was almost like a trade. Jerry Bell is one of the cases where the card looks better than the stats. So he's got a 3.97 ERA, 31 games, 25 starts, 183 and 2/3 innings. Starter 7. So that'll help versus starter 6. Gives hopefully gets into an extra inning to give his bullpen a break. He would be the weakest pitcher on the White Sox, but they are loaded otherwise. Jerry Bell is the riskiest pick of the Cub draft, but we like the card. And now you'll see the Giants. We passed, they still pass. And now we're back to Ohio. So now we're down to 5 tokens. We went from 7 to 6 and now to 5. And Ohio players, guess what? Carlos May found a home. Carlos May was traded in the offseason from the White Sox to the Twins as part of the Jim Cott deal. The Twins could not find a spot on their own roster for him, and they let him go. And the Ohio players said, we certainly could use all the help we can get. We're the worst team in the league. We draft first. Carlos May, this is not a slouch here. He's got 20 homers, 96 RBI, 268, 747. He joins George Hendrick and Bill Robinson in a very good outfield for an expansion team, the Ohio players. All right, next up, the Cardinals. We mentioned they needed pitching. They got the lefty. Now they need 2 righties. In the year of 74, they found Jackie Brown sitting out there as a member of the Texas Rangers who didn't select him. He's got a 3.57 ERA in 216 innings, can pitch on 3 days rest. He'll go right into the Cardinal rotation behind John Curtis, Bob Gibson, and Bob Forsch. Great pick. The Cardinals have suddenly started to right the ship. Mike Wallace, Jackie Brown. These are good picks. Not going to put them in the World Series, but they're good picks for the Cardinals, who need to hit on all 4 if they want to compete in the tough National League North with the Cubs, Pirates, and Reds. So far, so good. Seattle needed to add a pitcher, and they found Glenn Abbott, who later in the decade pitches for Seattle. That seemed like a no-brainer. ERA of 3 in the year of 74 with a 128 whip. Fit meets need meets fit, and history obliges for Seattle. Love it when we get an actual Seattle Mariner on Seattle before they come into existence. California Angels, they may have to regret something they did. They decided to add a 13th hitter at the expense of knowing they'd have to cut Darren Johnson. And this will come up later. You hear the name Darren Johnson, you're not going to like it. So Darren Johnson gets cut from their roster. They needed a pitcher, and they found, the best they could find is Ken Wright in the year of 73. Intriguing card to say the least. 80 innings, only 60 hits allowed, but a lot of walks, 82 of them. He's sort of like a Nolan Ryan for the bullpen for the California Angels. But it's an intriguing card, and I've kind of wanted to play this card to see how it works out. He's the long man, the least used pitcher on one of the better pitching staffs in the American League. Don't forget, California's got Ryan, Tanana, they've got Andy Hassler, and they have Don Kirkwood, Montague, and I forget who the fourth pitcher is. They got a great pitching staff, and Dave LaRoche is the closer. So they can afford a weakness in long relief. The Padres, they pass. After taking D'Acquisto, they completed their 20-man roster. Arizona, now they did a swap. They moved Steve Stone out of his 1975 card into a 1973 card to facilitate another player getting better, and we'll see that next time Arizona comes up. For Steve Stone, it doesn't matter too much because 75 and 73, he's about the same. Houston needed to add a pitcher. They found one of their own. In the year of 73, this RO3 means he's the third-rated undrafted free agent on the board. He's a Houston Astro, and the Houston Astros take him. Tom Griffin plays the beginning of the decade with the Astros, eventually goes to the Giants. Cleveland passed earlier. They'll pass again, as does Toronto. Colorado adds to the pass list. They're happy, which is a shock. You think an expansion team would want to keep making moves, but Colorado has passed. Kansas City is done. So Kansas City took advantage of picking early with Frank White and Duke Sims, and now they can still go, but they're happy. They and the White Sox will probably be dueling for the American League South. The Pirates, in a move that's somewhat questionable, needed to simply add a hitter. They needed a backup catcher. This is sort of similar to Kansas City with Fran Healy adding Duke Sims, a lefty catcher. Pittsburgh's got Manny Sanguillen, so you pretty much don't want him to sit at all, but generally catchers need a day off. So we found a lefty catcher, and not only that, Gene Lamont managed the Pirates in the late 90s, so we found that connection. Here he was a hitter for the Detroit Tigers. He's got a stroke, he's got power versus righties, but not much of a batting average. So Gene Lamont goes to the Pittsburgh Pirates, the least used player on a great Pittsburgh team. Great move here for Detroit. They decided to make an improvement of Dave Chalk. They turn him into a 1E12 at third base and a 273 batter. So now statistically he will overachieve what Aurelio Rodriguez would have done at the hot corner in Detroit. Aurelio was a 1E11 sometimes, but he never had that batting average that Dave Chalk has. So that is an improvement for the Detroit Tigers. Las Vegas got a gift from Baltimore. Baltimore allowed them Paul Mitchell out of their organization. Funny part is, Paul Mitchell left the Baltimore organization. They kind of gave up on him, which is a shame. He was a pretty good pitcher. He actually lasted for about 5 years, pitching for, I believe, Milwaukee from 1975 to 1980. So Paul Mitchell will continue his career with an expansion team, Las Vegas. The Expos have passed. All they needed to do was to get Larry Parrish in a good spot, and they did. And they've aced the draft otherwise. They're done. Boston made a deal before passing, and it was not a minor deal whatsoever. Boston traded Tommy Harper. Let's go look at the stats on the teams. St. Louis and Boston, trade partners from the past, did it again. Boston traded Tommy Harper, 1973 card, a 3-4 in left field, 638 plate appearances, stole 54 bases, had 17 home runs, 281, 774 OPS. Tommy Harper's on the Cardinals as their new DH, or actually he'll play left. Lou Brock will be the DH. So Tommy Harper and Lou Brock will be teammates on the Cardinals. Hey, the Cardinals, they're trying, folks. They're trying like heck. And what is the prize that Boston got back in return? Boston added from the year 73, if I can find it in here somewhere, Bill Sedakis. He was actually a Texas Ranger. He's been on the Cardinals the last few years. He can catch, play first, third in the outfield. Basically, Boston needed a backup catcher for Carlton Fisk. Bill Sedakis crushes home runs against left-handed pitching. That is a complete, total nightmare in Fenway Park. Back in an era when, right-handed hitters used to love going to Fenway Park for home runs. There's no better home run hitter versus lefties with a 1973 card than Bill Sedakis. You got to look that one up, folks. Bill Sedakis, 1973. He's now on the Red Sox. After making that trade, Boston is complete and happy. They're done. They wanted more of the Bill Sedakis power, less of the Tommy Harper speed. The Mets are happy. They've passed. They've had a great draft. The Texas Rangers are on the clock. Is this their first move? I believe it is. Texas added Jim Sundberg with his -2 arm, and as a rookie, he went to the 1974 All-Star Game, hitting just .247. They already had Dave Rader, so Dave Rader now goes to DH. Jim Sundberg goes to catcher. And again, you're seeing this pattern of right-handed catcher, left-handed catcher. Sundberg and Dave Rader. Atlanta passed earlier. They pass again. And the Cubs. So this is the other half. This is the beginning of another Cub trade. The Cubs moved Bill Bonham out of his 1974 card with an ERA of 4 into a 1973 card with an ERA of 3. So Bill Bonham lowers his ERA by a run simply by swapping years with a teammate. We'll see that a little bit further down. The White Sox needed to add a utility infielder against lefties, and all they had to do was call uptown to the Cubs, who put Glenn Beckert on waivers in the offseason. George Orta is the starting second baseman for the White Sox, but he's a 4. Now Glenn Beckert will back him up as a 3, and Bucky Dent is the new 2 at shortstop, replacing Aparicio. So the White Sox are checking all the necessary boxes for a long playoff run. Next up, the Giants passing again. And we're back again to Ohio. If you're wondering what's happening with 31 and 32, 31 is the Cincinnati Reds and 32 is the Oakland A's. They've spent a lot of money in the offseason, so they don't have a pick yet, neither team. We'll see how that plays out soon. Okay, back to Ohio. Ohio gave up on Gene Clines. They drafted him earlier, way up here. They drafted Gene Clines with a 327 on base and a 656 OPS, and they found that they could actually look on the street and find something better than that. And it's this guy, Pepe Mangual, who's an ace stealer. He's a 3 defensively, and he hits lefties better than righties. He becomes a defensive replacement for Carlos May and gets starts against some tough lefties. So Pepe Mangual will back up Carlos May on Ohio. The Cardinals. This might be my new favorite team. This is the 4th or 5th mention of them. They're still adding players. They found a guy who used to pitch very well for them. Frank Lindsay had a really good 1970-71 for the Cardinals. He's near the end of his career. He's going to return to the Cardinals with a 3.57 ERA. Didn't they have a 3.57 ERA on Jackie Brown? Where is that? Here's Mike Wallace. Yeah, Jackie Brown had a 3.57 ERA. Frank Lindsay, 3.57 ERA for the St. Louis Cardinals. They're not going to the All-Star game with these players, but they've got some talent. They're getting some talent at St. Louis at bargain bin prices. They are thrift store shopping, are the Cardinals, and doing very well at it. Next up, Seattle. I don't think we've heard their name. Oh, yeah, they took Glenn Abbott earlier. They needed a utility infielder. They found super utility infielder, a switch hitter with power, Ted Kubiak, who can play second, third, and short. He only hits .220. He's got an opportunistic split versus righties instead of lefties for a switch hitter. That's what we like. We usually like low batting average hitters to have an imbalanced split and take advantage of it. And that's what the Mariners will do with Kubiak, plus have some defense. They used to have all fours in their infield defensively. No more. They've improved the entire infield and outfield in the offseason defensively. They've also improved their starting pitching. So they're making some smarter moves for an expansion team. Not as smart as Toronto, but still smart moves. The Twins. I don't think we've heard their name, but they're happy with what they did. They're going to pass. California. They pass after adding that pitcher Ken Wright. That was all he needed to do. Cost them Darren Johnson, but they pass. San Diego passed earlier. They'll do it again. Arizona, this was the other player. So when they moved Steve Stone out of 75 to 73, Pedro Garcia moves from 73 to 75, and Pedro Garcia crushes left-handed pitching. He'll platoon with 307 hitting John Knox, the lefty-righty platoon at second base. Garcia brings the defense and the power. John Knox brings the left-handed bat and batting average. Houston, they needed a catcher versus lefties. They added Pat Corrales. Footnote here, ultimately they would replace him with Ken Suarez later on. So, because they readdressed their team and said, hey, why do we go Corrales? We could find somebody better later. So they cut Corrales as a 208 hitter and replaced him with Ken Suarez as a 242 hitter. Cleveland passes, and then Toronto, and then we'll see Colorado. That looks familiar. Kansas City, that looks familiar. The Pirates pass. So now we're going to see a big chunk of passing, which is nice. This thing will speed up nicely. Baltimore. Johnny Edwards was part of Houston. Houston gave his rights away to Baltimore. Houston would move up in the draft with Baltimore to do that. Edwards is a left-handed catcher to platoon with Earl Williams, a right-handed hitting catcher. Getting a lot of lefty-righty catching platoons. Really cool. It's hard to do. You think it's easy. It isn't. You get star catchers in our league like Johnny Bench, Carlton Fisk. Yeah, that's easy. But most of the catchers are mediocre, and a platoon certainly helps. Detroit, the numbers on this are going to look terrible. They needed a reliever, a right-handed reliever. If he could get lefties out better than righties, that's what they preferred. Because Oscar Zamora is already in the Tiger bullpen. He's a righty who gets righties out. They found Jerry Johnson, who's very old. Well, he's not that old. He's only 30, but he's out of the game after this year. Terrible ERA of 4.80, gets lit up by righties. But against lefties, it's just some singles and some walks. So a righty who gets lefties out, Detroit Tigers with some postseason experience, they'll figure that out. They'll join John Hiller, Bob Veal, and Oscar Zamora in the Tiger bullpen. Baltimore. Oh, this is a fun story. So Baltimore had Rorik Harrison, who had a fantastic 1972. All Baltimore pitchers, the entire pitching staff had an ERA below 3, including the obvious, the 20-game winners of 71, who no longer won 20 games. But you also had Doyle Alexander, Rorik Harrison, guys just out of AAA with ERAs in the 2s. Rorik Harrison was sent to the Braves for 73 and beyond as part of the Davey Johnson Earl Williams trade, and from there it was pretty bad. Pitching in a hitter-friendly park in Atlanta, they lit him up. Baltimore bails him out. They decided to bring him back to Baltimore with Atlanta stats of 73, and they're not that bad. It's a .416 earned run average. He gets righties out pretty well. He's got a 146 whip, which is on the high side. He's a righty starter who gets righties out. Baltimore's got a terrific bullpen that could bail him out. They got Grant Jackson, Tippy Martinez, Dyer Miller, Eddie Watt. So the plan is Palmer, Cuellar, Garland will probably pitch deep into games, and they'll use the bullpen when Rorik Harrison starts for the Orioles. Nice little get Rorik back to Baltimore moment there. Okay, the Expos passed earlier. We saw that. Boston passed. The Mets passed earlier. Yes. Texas still making moves. Oh, this is another move to make 2 players better. It was getting Lindblad and Sundberg. So Lindblad used to have a 74 card. So Sundberg's only good year that we found in this timeline is 74. So Lindblad decided to leave that year so Sundberg can be in his best year. And Lindblad goes to his 76 card, which is comparable to 74. ERA is 306, a little bit higher. He's better against righties than he was before, not as good against lefties. And the whip is about the same, 117. So not much of a loss for the Rangers, but to get a -2 arm catcher, Sundberg, and they'll have Sundberg throughout the rest of the decade, early 80s. So it's a good move for Paul Lindblad, Sundberg, and Texas. Atlanta passes. The Cubs, so this is the other half of the move. So this is what you can do with a player like Don Kessinger. He's very flat performance, year in and year out, same kind of deal. He's a 2 shortstop, switch hitter. So he goes from his 73 card, they give him a 2-year contract with a 74 card. Stats are just about the same. But Bill Bonham was not very good in 74, was really good in 73. So Kessinger gets an extension, Bonham gets better. Win-win for the Cubs. The White Sox passed. They have had a fantastic draft, and they feel like they have a World Series team if Oakland falters in the American League. Giants pass. Cincinnati Reds, first mention of them, no surprise at all. They left a long time ago. I mean, they could play with 18 guys or 17 if they needed to. So the team with an embarrassment of riches is ready to defend the National League pennant. And folks, here it comes, and this is a killer right here. The Oakland A's took Darren Johnson off the floor when the California Angels, of all teams, a division rival and theoretically the second best team in the American League West, let Darren Johnson go because they had Ed Kirkpatrick and Jim Spencer, and they just a bad job of configuring their offense. They were hoping. They were trying to find a trade partner. Nobody chimed in, and they were hoping that Darren Johnson wouldn't fall to Oakland. Funny part about this, Darren Johnson in 1973 played for Oakland, absolutely crushes left-handed pitching. And do you know who Oakland had to cut to add Darren Johnson to the roster? You might remember if you watched the last video. It was the last pick they made in the draft in the 8th round, Willie Mays. So no, Willie Mays was drafted, but he did not make the final cut. Oakland let him go and said, thank you, Willie, for showing up, but it's time to retire. And don't go through that 1973 season you went through with the Mets. So we're not playing that Willie Mays card. It's a bad card. I hate to play bad cards with Hall of Famers. We didn't do that with the last couple Ernie Banks cards. We didn't get Harmon Killebrew in this league this year. We let him retire. And Willie Mays is gone. Darren Johnson also is a better defensive first baseman than Gene Tennis. Oakland's just not letting up. They're as good as they were a year ago. They might be better. Don't know if the White Sox and Oakland, the gap between them has changed at all. All right. Back up to the top of the draft. Now we're down to 3 tokens. The Ohio players needed a third baseman, and you see this red? It means something, folks. And the letter R, this is a guy pulled out of retirement. We talked about this in the off-season strategies, that there are often calls made to guys pulled out of retirement because sometimes they fit a specific need that the available players do not. Looking at the 8-round draft here for red guys pulled out of retirement, notice? No, not this year. We didn't go out and get guys. We got Bob Miller. Bob Miller was a Pittsburgh Pirate. Toronto found him with one good year. He's 35 years old. They pulled him out of retirement. And that was the first guy and the only guy in the draft. And this third baseman that was just added to the Ohio players, Celerino Sanchez, he's a 3E18 at third base. Good defense at third base and hits lefties reasonably well. That's the need that Ohio needed to get, and that's what they found. He was better than the available third basemen who were terrible at that particular point of the draft. We're back to the St. Louis Cardinals. This is the St. Louis Cardinal undrafted free agency draft. They needed to add a utility outfield DH type, easy pickings, and they found this guy, Mike Adams. Interesting card. It's a 212 batting average, a 381 on base percentage, a 760 OPS. Fun looking card. Power and walks, something that the Cardinals aren't accustomed to. They added the speed of Tommy Harper. They add the slugging and walks of this guy, Mike Adams, to cushion some of the loss of Bill Sadakis, who they traded to Boston. So overall, St. Louis is making some tasty lemonade with what they're finding in undrafted free agency. You look at some of these other picks teams are making, and you're like, whatever. The Cardinals have aced every pick, and they have to ace all their picks. All right, next up, a new team, Florida. We have not heard from them yet because they haven't had money to make picks. They have to add 2 players, I believe. Let's go back to Florida situation and find out what they needed to do. Oh, yes. They got Ed Figueroa, got him better. So needed a 74 card, and Tom Bergmeyer got a lot better. So they needed a 75 card. So they're going to need a 74 and a 75. Well, first come, they found a 75 Pete Falcone, left-handed starting pitcher, 21 years old. He actually was assigned to Portland, who didn't have a spot. They had all their lefties. You can't have 4 lefties. You can only have 3. So Portland couldn't add him. So one expansion team steals him away from another expansion team. Funny part about it was I think Pete Falcone played for the Giants, played for the Cardinals, played for the Mets. So he bounced around. He becomes a good target for an expansion team anyway. I like to get guys who move from team to team to team on expansion teams. Seattle, up next, needed to add a left-handed bat, some versatility. Sonny Jackson, very versatile player. He can play center field as a 3 and shortstop. He's a left-handed hitter. He hits lefties and righties about the same, draws a lot of walks, decent base runner. Not a spectacular pick by any means, but that's a utility role in Seattle, so that's a nice pick for them. Now, again, a nice chunk of passing by Minnesota, Portland, California, San Diego, Arizona, Milwaukee, Houston, Cleveland, Toronto, and Colorado. Philadelphia, first time we've heard from them. Again, you're hearing teams you haven't heard from this late because they haven't had any money. They've used all their draft tokens, or a big chunk of them, earlier in the draft. They needed to add defense to their outfield to platoon with Jay Johnstone. They found this guy, John Jeter. John Jeter is a 2 with a -2 arm in the outfield. Hits lefties better than righties. 643 OPS, but a lot more power versus lefties and righties. A nice little platoon with Jay Johnstone. Then you have Kansas City, Pittsburgh, Vegas, Detroit. Baltimore still needs to add guys. Surprisingly, Baltimore, we didn't show you them. Baltimore actually had to add 3 guys themselves. We talked about the Cardinals, but it's really surprising that the Orioles would have to add so many. And the reason is they had a lot of improvement. They gave Mark Belanger his best year. They let Wayne Garland win 20 games. And Jim Palmer upgraded Cy Young cards between 1973 to 1975. So they had to go on the street for 3 different guys. You saw Rorick Harrison, and you saw Johnny Edwards, a left-handed catcher. The last guy they needed was a defensive outfielder who batted left-handed. And they found Bill Sharp. And I like this because Bill Sharp otherwise was probably going to be overlooked, because even though he brings you good defense, he's just a 0 arm. He doesn't really hit for a high average or do a lot of slugging or anything sexy like that. Just a 652 OPS. But for Baltimore, a team that never has gaudy offensive statistics anyway, that 2 in the corner with Paul Blair in center field. They also have Dick Sharon as a 2 in left. Great defense. Belanger, Bobby Grich, Brooks Robinson as 1s. Great defense will help that Baltimore pitching tremendously. And Baltimore's never going to win any batting titles in our league. Trust me. All right, the Expos and the Boston, the Mets, you've seen this. Texas now passes. Atlanta. The Cubs are doing another move. The Cubs are one of the busiest teams in this. They're still swapping internal players. The years of swapping is 1973 and 1976. They had 1973 Doug Rowell. This is going to hurt the Dodgers. They went to 1976 Doug Rowell. It's a 4-year contract extension to Doug Rowell. Lowers his ERA to 257 in 231 innings. Zooms up to number 2 starter in Chicago behind Fergie Jenkins. Folks, hate to say it, or maybe I'm glad to say it, this is big, big news for the National League. The Cubs are becoming a serious player with the Cincinnati Reds and the Pittsburgh Pirates, all in the same division. And for all 3 of those teams to make the playoffs, it's got to fall perfectly. It's happened before. It's so difficult when you only have 6 playoff teams to have 3 in the same division. You see this in the NFL. Sometimes I think you saw last year it was Detroit, Lions, Minnesota, and Green Bay. They all went to the playoffs, but there were 7 football teams. It's so hard for 3 teams to make the playoffs in one division. But the Cubs are really putting it together. Really nice team. Okay, the White Sox, we knew they passed. Giants passed. Reds passed. And now Oakland passes. We're getting near the end, folks. We have so many passes now. Ohio is done. And the Cardinals. The Ohio and Cardinals are finally done. These were the weakest teams. And these teams dug deeply undrafted free agency, trying to be competitive. Frankly, if they finish with a winning record, that's progress. I mean, that's what some teams are just set up for failure, and it's going to be hard for Ohio and St. Louis to succeed in the divisions they're in. We have a team, the Yankees, who used up a lot of money. As it turns out, it was a good use of their money because they pass. So the Yankees had to wait 98 picks to announce they don't want anybody. They're happy with the 20 guys they drafted, and the Yankees said thanks. They were just watching TV the whole time, and did not get involved in undrafted free agency. Portland, Seattle. Seattle passes now. All right, a new team. Yes. And it's not the first time this has happened. The Dodgers. A few years ago, they were the team without any money, were signing guys off the street late in the draft. They're doing it again. Dodgers simply have too many right-handed bats on their team. So they found a left-handed bat, because remember, they got Dave Lopes, Ron Say, and Bill Russell. They found a left-handed infielder named Frank Baker who can play second, third, and short to play against some difficult righties. Frank Baker, it's 190. And that's what the Dodgers are doing. I'm reading the tea leaves, folks, and I think there's a huge gap between what the Giants have done with their roster and what the Dodgers have done with their roster. Something that history does not necessarily back up. But in the carryover league, the gap is in reverse order. The Giants were not very good in the 70s. The Dodgers were really good. And it's working in the opposite manner. Twins passed earlier. Florida, they needed two guys, right? They took Falcone in 75. They needed a third baseman. They found a left-handed hitting third baseman, Roy Howe, in the year of 74. Frankly, the Dodgers probably should have taken Roy Howe, but the years were wrong. See, Roy Howe, 74. The Dodgers had to take a guy in 73. They end up with a 190 hitter. Florida ends up with a 250 hitter. California, San Diego, all these passes. There's probably one more Cub coming up, I think. And there he is. So the other half, the Doug Rowell deal, he moves from 73 to 76. And Rick Russell is the guy who takes one for the team here. Rick Russell's 1973 and 1976 seasons were pretty equal. I think 76 he might be a little bit better. But 73, Russell, he's got an ERA of 3. He can still pitch on 3 days rest. But he gets nipped by lefties a little bit more. It's the only difference. So it was worth it for the Cubs to have Doug Rowell be a lot better, significantly better, if Rick Russell was going to be about the same. And so the 73 and 76 cards were swapped. And now we might be getting done, unless for the Dodgers. Yep. So the Dodgers, for some mysterious reason, drafted Bobby Tolan, a left-handed outfielder, when they already had left-handed outfielder Bill Buckner, left-handed outfielder Willie Davis, left-handed outfielder Willie Crawford. Well, they didn't. They also have Jim Wynn, who was going to be the DH, so Bobby Tolan was never going to play, so they cut him, and they got Biff Pocoroba, a nice catcher, switch-hitting catcher with nice on base, to platoon with Steve Yeager to become the 4th left-handed bat on the Dodger lineup, which is reasonable. And if they decide to use Frank Baker, that makes 5 left-handed bats in the Dodger lineup. So that's pretty sensible for the Dodgers now. Again, they've got a strong core anyway, because you remember, you got Yeager, Garvey, Say, Lopes, Russell, etc. So you do have that core for LA before we start banging on them. It's just that their depth, their bench players, you see, are somewhat sketchy. But who knows? Remember, Oakland won the World Series a year ago. Their bench players are Pat Corrales, Larry Brown, and Rusty Torres. Oakland has improved their bench a lot this year with Phil Garner and Darren Johnson. So those guys are a lot better than what they had a year ago. So we'll see how it all plays out. So after that move, I think it might be over finally. Nope. Dodgers again. Dodgers had 3 catchers on their roster because once they went to Biff Pocoroba, they had Ken Suarez and Steve Yeager. They had 3 other 12 players were only exclusive catchers, which was just terrible. So they cut Suarez. That's where Houston jumped in, added Suarez, cut Pat Corrales. This actually makes a little bit of sense. They found this guy who they should have taken up here. Where? There, Frank Baker. Horace Clarke, at least, his defense is why he fell. He's 33 years old. He's a 4.20, and he can only play second base. The offense is okay. He's a 263 hitter. He had 650 plate appearances for the Yankees, full season. Nice on base percentage, C-stealer, good base runner. And if you're wondering, Davey Lopes can play some shortstop on his card. We could take a look at that, I believe, just to double check. So they were looking for a shortstop because they're not crazy about Bill Russell against righties. And it turns out you can move Lopes over for some starts. So there it is. Davey Lopes, a 3.12. He can play third base, a 4.37. He can play shortstop, a 4.48, and he can play center field, a 4.16. So Davey Lopes at age 28, a late bloomer, by the way. He's had some versatility with that 73 card. And so now the Dodgers have they went from 3 left-handed bats to 6 left-handed bats, and they're much more balanced and flexible than they used to be. So that's a kind of a nice move. I like that move for the Dodgers. Better than the Frank Baker move. Clarke and Pocoroba make some sense. Frank Baker, I'm still scratching my head about that one. And that should be it. Yeah, that's the end of undrafted free agency. And after all that, when we add up all the records of all the teams, finally, we're at 640 players. We were ready to start the league. It's come to that. Undrafted free agency is over. Every team is ready to go. And so now it's officially play ball for the 1973-76 season. Spoiler alert, the opening series broadcast, the defending champion Oakland A's will open up at home against the Detroit Tigers, winners of the American League North. Detroit at Oakland, you can probably expect Mickey Lolich versus Catfish Hunter coming up. All right, thanks for checking this out. We'll see you for opening day.